Welcome, dear students. This session would focus on the general characteristics of Renaissance period with reference to English language. I hope and expect that by the end of this session, you would be able to understand and distinguish the characteristic features of the times of Renaissance as well as the language that was used during this time. Well, my dear students, the Renaissance time was a time of discovery, of inventions, of learning, of interest in classics, of, keenness and willingness to venture, to explore. And all this spirit of the times, of the age, is clearly reflected in the linguistic matters of the times. There are certain important points with reference to that, which means with reference to the development of English language in this period. The most important factor and the first factor is a conscious interest in the development of language. If you trace the history back, you would see this is for the first time conscious efforts both on the individual as well as the collective level are made. Behind all this, is a lot of development and a lot of changes and a lot of linguistic experiences that people had, the stages that language went through. In the Old English times, the way the language was, how in the Middle English times, with the masses, it had, an upgradation, it had an acceptance. After passing through all these stages, now it was at a time in the history where, it needed a more conscious effort for its stability and its standardization. For the first time, people took a conscious interest in, kind of the betterment of language. It was actually for the first time that some attention was paid to the problems of language, issues related to the development of language. Of course, then people had different kinds of opinions. Let's take the example of borrowings. There would be people who supported it, and then there were people who were against the borrowings, which ultimately led towards a kind of a compromise on borrowing. But all this shows something, and that is that people, that is common people, as well as scholars and linguists, they were genuinely interested in the development and in the fixation of language. In fact, dear students, the 15th century had witnessed sporadic attempts by individual writers to embellish their writing style with, kind of vocabulary and the terms that would be all ornamental, and they would beautify their language. But of course, there were issues related to that. These attempts, at one hand, were a challenge for the people who were more conservative and traditional, but on the other hand, these attempts also show an interest in the language. At least people, for the first time, wanted to settle the issues and give it a standard. It was, in fact, by the 16th century that a lot of books and pamphlets and prefaces and, incidental observations were made. Writers, editors, they wrote it clearly in their works. They published, their opinions very strongly about the linguistic change that was happening in England and the directions that they wanted it to take. There were people who defended, the road that is language was taking now, in the flux of change, in the flux of all the discoveries and inventions and all those happenings that were happening around. But then there were, of course, people who were not supporting it. The result of this in terms of English language was also that, in the context of the genuine interest in classics, the people there were the people who supported the use of Latin language and the borrowings from Latin language as well as from French language. And then there were people who were against all that. But, the majority of the people during these times, the Renaissance times, because of the influence or impact of Renaissance, were favoring the changes that were taking place in language. They were of the opinion, generally speaking, that language has to change. It has to adapt to the needs of the times. So it should be accepted that way. So, there were two contributions that they made. The first contribution that they made was they defended its case. The second contribution that they made was that they recognized it as a language that was owned by and that belonged to England and the English people, and they recognized its strengths. There was another contribution that these people made, and that was the efforts, how they urged that it should be fit into, the requirements. The urge to make it, fit into the box of all the needs and requirements of the times, both literary and of everyday times. They also, contributed by, promoting general education and learning, which in a way was related to, the promotion of English language. Overall, my dear students, this is a time that showed a great desire. The desire, A, to fix the language. B, to make it stable. C, to kind of modernize it. Not only to make it stable and to standardize it, but also to modernize it, and that was the need of the times. So, these people, under the spirit of, under the influence of Renaissance, they were eager to accept the changes in the language, and they were willing to give it a form and a shape and a standard.